I've always had an interest in the supernatural. Since I was a kid, anything to do with monsters, mythology, or cryptids usually had my attention, and my favorites have always been werewolves. Ever since I watched Scooby-Doo's Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Werewolf, I have found the idea of man turning to beast fascinating. For my witchcraft course, I even wrote a 20-page research paper on cross-cultural shapeshifter myths, focusing on a comparison between European werewolf mythology and Navajo skinwalker folklore, which leads me to what happened to me and my friends on a warm summer night 7 years ago. I was going into my second year of university, was enjoying the summer, and it was a weekend night. We were 19, and in Canada, you are old enough to go to a bar and drink. So, a group of my friends, all of whom I have known from elementary school, decided to go out to one of the party streets in our decently large city. A large arcade-themed bar was our usual spot, and we made it to the front of the line, which thankfully wasn't long due to us getting started early. However, one of my friends had decided to wear shorts on that night, and the bouncer, having apparently enacted a rule recently created by the owner, refused to let him in. We all rolled our eyes. This bar was in no way a fancy place, and we were pretty regularly had underage people in it. But God forbid they wear shorts while doing so. But we weren't going to get into an argument with the 300-pound bouncer. Some of us decided to go in, but 4 of us, me included, decided to find another spot. This group included Jaden, the guy who was refused entry due to shorts, James, the redneck of my group, myself, and Athena, formerly known as Andrew, who's a bit of an oddball, but we were happy to have her out with us. However, none of us were ready to call it a night, and we drunkenly made our way to Athena's place, as she had weed. Weed at the time was still illegal, and while I personally didn't really like the stuff, I had no issues hanging out with my buddies when they did. So after an enjoyable drunken walk on a warm summer night, we made it there, and they shared a joint on the neighborhood's playground. It was about 2 a.m., and after a visit to a convenience store for treats, we elected to call it a night. While the effect of alcohol had all but worn off for me, my friends were still high, the night was still warm, and it wasn't a far walk home to the neighborhood where we lived. After we left Athena's neighborhood, Jaden, James, and I were walking past a fenced-off big piece of land that was a mixture of forest and farmland, serving as an environmental research site for the ecological and agricultural departments for the local big university. We walked adjacent to it on the sidewalk and had a steady conversation the whole way through, but there was a shift when the topic of conversation went to spooky stuff. As the resident spooky stuff guy, I decided to talk about skinwalkers, so I asked if either of them had ever heard of them. And yes, I am aware that there is superstition around saying their name, but you have to remember that I was still feeling the effects of alcohol, and I'm generally of the opinion that none of these guys aren't real. As soon as I said it, James interrupted, half-jokingly. "Colton, you're not supposed to say their name. Boom! Boom! Boom!" Our balls shot to our throat as we heard something very big, very fast, and very loud tearing through the forest next to us. We all either froze or jumped out of our skin as our eyes shot to the fence that separated us from the woods and saw the trees shake from this unknown force's movement. I had actually volunteered with the university's urban wildlife monitoring project to set up trail cameras and record data, so I was aware that moose would occasionally be sighted in this area. But at that moment, my logical reasoning was all gone, and my mind was empty of all thoughts except one. After the initial shock had worn off, and the 3 of us were capable of taking a couple breaths to steady ourselves, we quickly decided together to back up slowly, crossing the street next to us and walking along the sidewalk on the other side. Throughout this movement, my eyes never strayed from the direction we had heard the rampage erupt from. Once we had crossed, with a few meters of asphalt and the occasional parked car separating us from the woods, we allowed ourselves to take a few more breaths to calm the rapid pounding of our hearts that I'm sure was occurring in each of our chests. While I had managed to breathe mostly normally again, my heart barely slowed down, and I was still in survival mode, never taking my eyes away from the tree line. "What the hell was that?" Jaden panted, clutching his chest as she tried to slow his breathing. Neither James or I gave an answer, but most responded with variations of "holy shit" and nervous laughing at the shock of the situation. We joked a bit as we speed-walked down the sidewalk, but kept making quick glance towards the tree line. Jaden has always one of the more nervous of my friends, and had his eyes wide, his breathing heavy, and was shaking slightly. James, on the other hand, was a tad more relaxed, laughing a bit, but was still definitely on edge. My eyes kept shifting back and forth, and could still feel myself in fight mode, with my jaw and fists clenched, waiting for something to emerge from the trees. We agreed to keep going, able to relax slightly more with each step, and we were able to laugh more about the situation. We were joking about bad that crashing got us, and began to theorize on what it could be. I was about to bring up the moose suggestion, but we once again were interrupted by more movement. Like a shark or whale moving through the ocean near the surface, the leaves of the woods rustled as a mass traveled through the edge of the bushes and trees, slowly closing the distance from the space we had made from our initial scare. All of our eyes locked, wide with terror. With no communication needed, we picked up the pace, changing from a stroll to a jog, keeping our eyes on where the leaves were rustling and the twigs were snapping. We decided to stop, and the sounds and movement stopped too, seemingly trying to keep pace with us. Our breathing was heavy, and we looked back from each other to where the unknown thing had stopped. "All right," I began. "If something comes out of those woods, you two run." Both Jaden and James looked at each other with a strange expression, looking back at me with unease like I was crazy. But as terrified as I was on the inside, at that moment I had decided. If what was following us was what I think it was, running would be pointless. If it wanted us dead, we'd be dead long before we could race back to the safety of our homes. I was the one who said its name. I was the one who brought the attention of whatever this thing was. If it decided to attack, it should be me that tries to give them time to escape. "Colton, what the—" James begun before another rustle escaped from the trees. The thing in the bushes was on the move again. We went back into our half-run, half-speed walk, all of us keeping our eyes on where the noise was coming from, while moving to the end of the street as quickly as possible. Once there, one of our university's campuses and light rail station would end the agricultural land and would make it so that whatever was following us would have to leave the forest in order to continue doing so. It wasn't much, but it would certainly beat facing whatever this thing was on its turf. I made sure to stay behind James and Jaden and remained closest to the road, waiting for something, anything, to make it past the fence and come for us. I was serious about what I said to them. If something did emerge from there and came at us, I had to put myself between them and it. I had to make sure that my friends would have time to escape. Soon our speed walking broke out into a full-on run, and while I still kept my spot at the back, I kept the pace to match my friends' speed. We had actually seemed to pull ahead of whatever was chasing us, because we couldn't see or hear the foliage shake from this thing's movement, but we didn't care. We were trying to get out of there as quickly as possible, regardless of if that thing was still following us. We were only a few meters from the T intersection where the forest would end. Once we had made it, we turned right, and I had one last look back before doing so. I nearly choked on my heart right there. A lone coyote was standing in the middle of the road, not running, just observing us. I had seen many coyotes. Hell, when I volunteered to set up camera traps with the university, I would see them every day. Was even stalked by one once. but they are almost always completely harmless to people. Coyotes were likely the most common large animal in the city and had learned to be incredibly successful here. But this one was different. First, it was easily the biggest coyote I had ever seen, with a thick, healthy coat and size that was larger than my golden retriever. Instead of the usual unease and trotting that I was used to seeing from coyotes towards humans, this one seemed interested in us. It didn't seem nervous about us at all, it just stood there. While I didn't see its eyes, I was sure it was looking right at us. "Colton, let's go," Jaden hissed, and I realized I had stopped moving and was just staring at the thing. I looked back to where the coyote was and it began to move, a slow, sauntering walk towards where we were, unlike the usual quick-stepped movement you usually see from them. It moved more like a big cat, confident of its place on the hierarchy. All my confidence I had to face this thing melted away, and I turned away to race down the street with my friends, huffing and puffing. I frequently turned back and forth throughout our sprint, and despite my fear, kept my friends in front of me. Nothing ever emerged from behind that corner, and once we crossed the train tracks, we slowed down. The rest of the walk back was a bit livelier, but we still kept our heads on a swivel, frequently looking back to make sure we weren't being followed. Eventually, we split up into two groups, Jared and James taking a left once we entered the neighborhood, and me continuing on straight, down a large alley that led to my avenue. Thankfully, even walking it, the distance to my house was quite short from there, and once I entered the alley, away from the presence of my friends, I broke out into a full-on sprint. I raced down the alley, along the sidewalk to my house. I didn't bother looking back as I just wanted to be as safe as possible, behind 4 solid walls. I frantically fumbled for my keys and managed to sneak my way in before slamming and quickly locked the door behind me. I allowed myself to breathe easy for the first time in the last 20 minutes, the relatively short time feeling like hours of panic. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and chugged a tall glass of water, hoping to counteract the lingering effects of alcohol I might have to deal with the next day. At the time, I lived at my parents' place, which was a 2-story house, with my room facing the front of the property. I snuck up the staircase to avoid waking my parents, and made it to my room, placing the water by my bedside table and looking out the window one last time before shut-eye. I froze in place. On the street across from mine stood a coyote, looking right back at me. Again, it didn't look aggressive or scared, but stared back with an unshakable calm and curiosity. I frantically pulled the curtains over the window, nearly tearing them off the rod. I rushed into bed, pulling the covers over my face as a cold sweat overtook my body. I just laid there, all my courage having left my body during the walk home. I didn't dare look out the window but listened closely. Thankfully, I couldn't hear anything shuffling or scratching outside the safety of my home, and in exhaustion, eventually fell asleep. My sleep was not peaceful, however, and was filled with images of coyotes dancing through the forest, howls in the dark of a city, and a quiet, scratchy voice telling me to let it in. Thankfully, that was the end of my encounter, and I've never had another encounter with it since. Could it have just been a coyote? Maybe. They certainly have been getting bolder in the last few years, but no coyote should be able to make that much noise, rampaging around like an animal 20 times its size. I live in Western Canada, so while I am sure that the many indigenous groups that once and still do call this land home have at least one mythological being that can turn from man to beast, I am not familiar with it, and we certainly don't have skinwalkers. Wendigos maybe, the case of Swift Runner devouring his family and similar stories, certainly makes a strong argument that if this monster does exist, where I live would be within its hunting ground. But skinwalkers are a Navajo thing, and if that was what I encountered this faithful night, it certainly was thousands of kilometers from its usual territory. If it was, I hope it was a short vacation.